The battle had been raging for 18 hours when Vorthak warlord Gorvex Prime finally understood what he was fighting. This was not a normal military engagement between civilized species. This was something far more dangerous. The humans were not just trying to win a battle. They were trying to save every single civilian in the system, and they would die before they gave up. His tactical display showed the impossible situation developing around him. Human ships that should have been destroyed hours ago were still fighting, held together by emergency repairs and sheer determination. Civilian vessels that had no business in a war zone were flying through combat areas to rescue survivors. Even damaged human fighters continued attacking until they were completely unable to move. "Warlord, we have lost 60% of our assault forces," his tactical officer reported. "The humans are not following standard combat doctrine. They refuse to retreat even when facing superior numbers." Gorvex Prime studied the battle reports with growing alarm. His forces were individually superior to the humans in almost every way. Vorthak warriors were stronger, faster, and had natural armor that could stop most weapons. Their ships had better technology and more powerful weapons. By all logical calculations, they should have won this battle within the first few hours. But logic seemed to mean nothing to these Deathworlders. They fought like wild animals protecting their young, except they were protecting people they had never even met before. It made no sense from a strategic perspective, but it was devastatingly effective in practice. "Warlord, the humans have established a defensive corridor around the evacuation zone," another officer reported. "Our attempts to break through have failed. They have positioned their most damaged ships directly in our path, using them as mobile fortresses." This was the final proof that Gorvex needed. These creatures were not fighting a rational war. They were fighting an emotional war, driven by something his species had never encountered before. The humans actually cared more about saving strangers than they did about their own survival. On the surface of the third colony world, Commander Choi Yoonji was learning the same lesson from a different perspective. Her fighter had taken heavy damage during the atmospheric combat, but she was still flying. The cockpit was full of smoke, half her instruments were dead, and her left engine was making unhealthy noises. But there were still civilians on the ground who needed help. "Phoenix 1 to evacuation control," she called over the radio. "I have visual on a group of survivors near the old mining facility. They appear to be trapped by Vorthak ground forces." "Phoenix 1, your fighter is showing critical damage," came the reply. "Return to base for repairs." Commander Choi looked at her instrument panel. The computer was showing red warning lights for almost every system. Any sane pilot would head back to the carrier immediately. But through her cracked canopy, she could see the Thylorian families huddled in the ruins below, with Vorthak soldiers closing in from all sides. "Negative control. I still have weapons and I can still fly. These people need help now." She pushed her damaged fighter into one final attack run, diving toward the enemy positions despite the protests from her failing engines. Her weapons fired until the power systems overloaded, clearing a path for the civilians to escape. Only then did she finally turn toward home, limping through the sky on emergency power. This scene was repeated throughout the system as human forces pushed themselves far beyond what should have been possible. Ships with hull breaches continued fighting. Pilots with failing life support systems kept flying rescue missions. Marines with serious injuries refused medical evacuation until all civilians were safe. Captain Yoon Hae-won was discovering her own limits aboard the overloaded cargo hauler Mokpo Trader. Her ship now carried over 4,000 Thylorian refugees, nearly double what the life support systems were designed to handle. The air was getting thin, the temperature was rising, and the artificial gravity was fluctuating under the excessive load. "Captain, we need to stop taking on passengers," her chief engineer reported. "The ship can't handle any more stress." Captain Yoon looked at her screens, showing more evacuation shuttles approaching with refugees from the surface. Each shuttle carried families who had lost everything, including small children who were scared and crying for their parents. The rational decision would be to refuse them and head for safety. "How long can we maintain current conditions?" she asked. "Maybe 6 more hours if we're lucky. After that, the life support systems will start failing." 6 hours. The journey to the nearest safe system would take 8 hours. Captain Yoon did the math in her head and didn't like the answer. But she also couldn't live with herself if she abandoned people who needed help. We take them all, she decided. Every last one. Then we figure out how to make it work. Her crew worked miracles with emergency repairs and creative engineering. They rerouted power systems, adjusted atmospheric mixtures, and found ways to make critical systems work far beyond their design limits. It was dangerous, but it was also necessary. Elder Christine Veltar watched the human rescue efforts from the Emergency Command Center with growing amazement. Her people had studied many different species during their time in the galaxy, but they had never encountered anything like this. The humans were not just fighting to win a battle. They were fighting to save everyone, even at terrible cost to themselves. Elder, the human casualties are approaching 30%, her aide reported. Their fleet has taken heavy damage, but they continue operations. Elder Veltar looked at the tactical display, showing human ships spread throughout the system. Many were badly damaged, some were barely functional, but none had retreated. They had created a protective barrier around the evacuation zones, using their own vessels as shields to protect the refugee ships. They are willing to die for us, she whispered in amazement. People they have never met, who can offer them nothing in return. They are willing to give their lives to save ours. Young Harmony Silden stood beside her, watching the displays, with wide eyes. The little Thylorian had been rescued from the surface by human marines, carried to safety in the arms of soldiers who treated her like their own child. Elder, why do they fight so hard for us? She asked in her musical voice. Elder Veltar looked down at the young one, searching for an answer. In all her years of diplomatic experience, she had never encountered such behavior from any species. Finally, she found the words. Because, little one, they are not just warriors, they are protectors. Their world taught them that the strong must defend the weak, and they have never forgotten that lesson. The battle continued for another day, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Vorthak forces began withdrawing from the system, unable to cope with an enemy that refused to follow the normal rules of warfare. They had come expecting to conquer a peaceful species, but instead they had encountered the fury of Deathworlders protecting innocent lives. Warlord Gorvex Prime gave the IA final retreat order with something approaching respect for his enemies. Mark this system as protected by human forces, he told his fleet. Spread the word throughout Vorthak space. These Deathworlders do not fight for territory or resources. They fight for others, and that makes them the most dangerous enemy we have ever faced. Admiral Kim Tae-sung stood on his bridge as the last Vorthak ships jumped to hyperspace. His fleet had paid a heavy price for victory. Dozens of ships were badly damaged, hundreds of his people were wounded, and some would never come home. But behind them, over 2 million Thylorian civilians were alive and safe. Admiral, final casualty reports are coming in. His communications officer announced. The numbers were sobering. The human fleet had suffered significant losses in ships and personnel, but they had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had deployed an entire armada not to conquer territory or claim resources, but simply to protect innocent people who had asked for help. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Thylorian colonies, the communications officer continued. Elder Christine Veltar wishes to speak with you. The elder's crystalline face appeared on the main screen, her features showing deep gratitude and something approaching reverence. Admiral Kim, on behalf of all Thylorian people, I thank you. We have no way to repay what you have done for us. Admiral Kim smiled tiredly. Elder, you don't need to repay anything. When someone calls for help, you answer. That's not a human military doctrine. That's just being human. The elder was quiet for a moment, processing this simple statement that revealed so much about human nature. Admiral, we called you Deathworlders because you came from a world that would kill us. We did not understand the truth. You are not bringers of death. You are protectors of life, and we were too frightened to see the difference. As the human fleet began the long journey home, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The Thylorian colonies would be rebuilt, this time under the protection of human bases. The Vorthak swarm would spread warnings throughout criminal space about the humans and their inexplicable willingness to fight for others. But perhaps most importantly, The galaxy had learned something new about the species from the small blue world. Humans were not just survivors from a dangerous planet, T. The human armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, like a swarm of angry hornets. What they saw made even the most experienced veterans clench their fists in rage. Thylorian cities were burning on 3 different worlds. Evacuation ships floated dead in space, their hulls torn open by Vorthak weapons. Smaller craft darted between the planets like vultures, hunting down any survivors trying to escape. Admiral Kim Tae-sung stood on the bridge of Sol's Promise, watching the tactical display with cold fury. His sensors showed Vorthak assault, ships landing on the colony worlds, loading captured Thylorians onto slave transports. Children were down there, hiding in shelters while monsters destroyed their homes. All ships, this is Admiral Kim, he broadcast on the fleet frequency. Weapons are free. Show these animals what happens when they hurt our friends. Captain Oh Min-seok heard the order aboard Sol's Fury and felt a familiar calm settle over him. This was what his ship was built for. The heavy cruiser had been designed to fight in conditions that would destroy vessels from other species. Her armor was thick, her weapons were powerful, and her crew had trained in the gravity wells of gas giants where most aliens would be crushed flat. All batteries target the nearest slave transport, he ordered. Fire when ready. Sol's Fury opened up with everything she had. Her main guns were designed to punch through asteroid mining equipment, which meant they could tear through ship. Hulls like paper. The first Vorthak transport exploded in a ball of fire, its cargo of stolen Thylorians never reaching the slave markets. But Captain O was just getting started. His ship dove into the battle like a shark, her weapons firing, continuously. The Vorthak ships tried to return fire, but they quickly discovered something disturbing. Human vessels didn't fight like other species. When damaged, they didn't retreat to safe positions for repairs. They kept fighting until either they won or they were destroyed. 3 systems away, Commander Choi Yoon-ji launched her fighters from the carrier Incheon Rising. 200 small craft poured out of the launch bays, each one piloted by someone who had trained in Earth's crushing gravity. Human pilots could handle acceleration forces that would kill most galactic species, which meant they could fly maneuvers that seemed impossible. Phoenix Squadron, form up on me, she ordered, climbing into her own fighter. We're going after those assault ships on the surface. Her fighter squadron dove into the atmosphere of the first colony world, something that would be suicide for most alien pilots. The gravity was heavy, the atmosphere was thick with smoke and chemical weapons, and the weather was getting violent from all the explosions. For humans who had learned to fly in Earth's storms, it was just another day at work. The Vorthak ground forces looked up in shock as human fighters screamed through the toxic air above them. Their own aircraft couldn't operate in such conditions, but the humans seemed to thrive in the chaos. Fighter after fighter dove down to attack Vorthak positions, their weapons designed to function in any environment. Commander Choi spotted a group of Thylorian civilians trapped near a burning building. Vorthak soldiers were moving in to capture them, but she had other ideas. Her fighter dropped low, flying between the buildings at speeds that should have been impossible. Her weapons fired continuously, clearing a path for the civilians to reach safety. This is Phoenix 1 to all ground units, she broadcast. Civilians are moving to evacuation point Alpha. Cover them. On the ground, Sergeant Bae Yu-jin of the Human Marines heard the call. She was crouched behind the remains of a Thylorian crystal garden, her squad preparing for assault. The Vorthak had landed troops near the main civilian shelter, and someone needed to clear them out. Second squad, move up, she ordered. Third squad, covering fire. Her Marines advanced through conditions that would have stopped most galactic military units. The air was full of toxic fumes from burning buildings. The gravity was heavier than Earth standard. Energy weapons were firing in all directions, and the temperature was climbing toward dangerous levels. But humans had evolved on a world where the environment tried to kill them every day. They had learned to fight in poisonous atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and gravitational conditions that would crush most other species. The Vorthak were tough and well-armed, but they had never faced an enemy that treated hostile environments as normal working conditions. Sergeant Bay's squad reached the civilian shelter just as Vorthak warriors were breaking down the doors. Inside, dozens of Thylorian families huddled together, their crystalline bodies reflecting the light from the fires outside. Their children made soft, chiming sounds of fear. "Take them down," Bay ordered. The battle was brief, but intense. The Vorthak were individually stronger than humans, with natural armor and superior reflexes. But the Marines had something the aliens didn't understand. They fought like their entire species depended on winning, because on Earth it usually did. When the smoke cleared, the Vorthak assault team was eliminated and the Thylorian families were safe. Sergeant Bay helped a young Thylorian child to her feet, noting how the little one's crystal structure was clouded with fear. "It's okay, little one," she said gently. "The bad guys are gone. We're here to take you somewhere safe." Young Thylorian Harmony Silden looked up at the human soldier with confusion and wonder. These strange creatures had seemed so gentle when she had seen them in diplomatic broadcasts, but watching them fight was like seeing nature itself come alive with protective fury. They moved through dangers that would kill her people, endured wounds that should have been fatal, and never stopped fighting while civilians were in danger. Meanwhile, in orbit above the planet, Captain Yoon Hai-wan was discovering what it meant to turn a cargo hauler into a rescue ship. Mokpo Trader had never been designed to carry passengers, but necessity had a way of inspiring creativity. Her crew had converted the cargo holds into temporary shelters, installed emergency life support systems, and opened every available space for refugees. "Captain, we're at maximum safe capacity," reported her first officer. "We have over 3,000 Thylorians aboard." "Safe capacity is a suggestion," Captain Yoon replied. "How many more can we fit if we push it?" "Maybe another 1,000, but the life support systems will be stressed beyond design limits." Captain Yoon looked at her screens, showing more evacuation shuttles approaching with refugees. Each one carried families who had lost everything, children who had watched their homes burn, parents who just wanted their little ones to be safe. "We'll make it work," she decided. "No one gets left behind." All across the system, the same scene was repeated. Human ships that had never been meant for combat were fighting like warships. Civilian vessels were carrying far more passengers than they were designed for. Military units were operating in conditions that would stop most galactic forces. The Vorthak had expected an easy conquest. What they got was a lesson in why Earth was classified as a death world, and why the species that survived there didn't know how to quit when innocent lives were at stake. The battle was far from over, but already the tide was turning. The humans had arrived, and they were showing the galaxy what happened when Deathworlders went to war. The emergency signal spread across human space like ripples in a pond. On dozens of worlds and hundreds of ships, humans received the same message. Innocent people needed help, and help was on the way. Captain Oh Min-seok was eating dinner in his quarters aboard the heavy cruiser Soul's Fury when the alert came through. He was a big man with thick arms and a scarred face from his years serving on the frontier. His ship had been patrolling the outer systems looking for pirates and smugglers. Now they had a much bigger job to do. "All hands, battle stations," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We have civilians under attack in Kepler 442. Set course immediately and prepare for combat operations." His crew moved quickly. They had trained for this kind of emergency many times. Within 20 minutes, Soul's Fury was jumping to hyperspace, pushing her engines to maximum speed. Captain O knew they might be too late, but they had to try. 3 systems away, Commander Choi Eun-ji received the same message aboard the carrier Incheon Rising. She was a small woman with quick hands and sharp eyes, known throughout the fleet as one of their best fighter pilots. Her ship carried 200 of the newest human fighters, each one designed to operate in conditions that would kill pilots from other species. "All squadrons prepare for immediate deployment," she ordered. "We're going to war, people. Check your life support systems twice. We don't know what we're flying into." Her pilots began their pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Human fighters were built tough because they had to be. Earth was a dangerous world, and humans had learned to build machines that could survive anything. Their ships could fly through radiation storms, toxic atmospheres, and gravitational fields that would crush lighter craft. But the most surprising response came from civilian ships. Captain Yoon Hai-wan was hauling mineral ore from the mining stations when she got the emergency call. Her ship Mokpo Trader was not built for rescue work. It was a big, ugly cargo hauler designed to carry heavy loads between systems. But when she heard that families with children were trapped, she didn't hesitate. Control Tower, this is Mokpo. Trader requesting immediate course change to Kepler 442. We're volunteering for evacuation duties. Captain Yoon, your ship is not equipped for passenger transport. The traffic controller replied. Then we'll make it work, she said simply. Those people need help and we're going to give it to them. All across human space, the same scene was repeated. Merchant ships, passenger liners, even small private vessels changed course toward the distant system. The humans were not just sending their military to fight. They were sending everyone who could help. Far away in the Kepler 442 system, Thylorian elder Christine Veltar watched the approaching disaster with growing fear. Her people had built 7 beautiful colonies in this peaceful system. They had farms where they grew food, schools where they taught their children, and crystal gardens where they created art. Now the Vorthak swarm was destroying everything. The Vorthak ships were ugly and functional, built for war and nothing else. They moved through space like predators, surrounding each colony and stripping away its defenses before landing troops on the surface. The gentle Thylorian defense fleet had lasted less than 3 hours against the alien invaders. Elder Veltar stood in the emergency command center on the largest colony world, watching reports come in from the other settlements. The news was all bad. The Vorthak were not just conquering the colonies. They were taking prisoners, loading Thylorian families onto slave ships for transport to distant markets. Elder were detecting new ships approaching the system, reported one of her technical staff. The signatures are unusual. Elder Veltar looked at the display screen. Dozens of ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, but they didn't look like any Federation vessels she had seen before. They were blocky and heavily armored, built for durability rather than elegance. Even stranger, they seemed to be arriving from many different directions. Can you identify them? She asked. The computer says they are human vessels, the technician replied, sounding confused. But Elder, there are so many of them. Our mathematical models suggest this represents the entire human military force in this region of space. Elder Veltar was puzzled. Why would the humans send such a large force to help a species they barely knew? The Thylorians had little contact with humanity beyond basic diplomatic relations. They had nothing to offer in return for such massive assistance. Meanwhile, on the other side of the system, Vorthak warlord Gorvex Prime was having similar thoughts. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, enslaving their populations and stripping their resources. These attacks usually followed a predictable pattern. The local defense forces would resist briefly, then collapse. Any outside help would arrive weeks later, too late to matter. But the approaching human fleet was different. His sensors showed ships of many different types, not just military vessels. Some appeared to be cargo haulers and passenger ships. Why would a species send civilian vessels into a combat zone? Analysis of human fleet composition, he ordered his tactical officer. Warlord, the fleet appears to be composed of whatever ships were available in the region. There are warships, but also merchant vessels, passenger liners, and industrial craft. It makes no strategic sense. Warlord Gorvex had studied many species during his long career of conquest. Most civilized races fought with careful planning and minimal risk. They would send enough force to accomplish their goals, but not enough to risk serious losses. The approaching human fleet seemed to ignore all logical principles of warfare. How many ships total? He asked. Over 300 vessels, Warlord, and more are still arriving. 300 ships to save a species they had no formal alliance with. Warlord Gorvex began to wonder if his intelligence about humans was incomplete. The human flagship Seoul's Promise. Admiral Kim Tae-sung watched his fleet assemble with grim satisfaction. The ships came from military bases, merchant fleets, and civilian volunteers. Some were powerful warships designed for battle. Others were simple cargo haulers whose only weapons were determination and courage. "Admiral, we have confirmation from all task forces," reported his communications officer. "Fleet assembly is complete. We have 347 vessels ready for action." Major Lim Ji-ho of the Human Marine Corps stood nearby, studying the tactical displays. He was a veteran soldier who had fought in the frontier wars. His men were already preparing for ground combat operations. "Sir, intelligence reports suggest the Vorthak have numerical superiority and superior individual fighting capability," he said. Admiral Kim nodded. The Vorthak were physically stronger than humans with natural armor and enhanced reflexes. In a fair fight, they would probably win, but humans had learned long ago that fair fights were for sports, not survival. "Major, the Vorthak have never fought an enemy from a death world," the Admiral replied. "They don't understand what that means yet." Major Lim smiled grimly. Earth had taught humanity many lessons about survival. The planet was full of dangerous weather, poisonous creatures, and natural disasters that would kill most galactic species. Humans had learned to fight in conditions that other races couldn't even survive in. "Sir, all ships report ready for action," the communications officer announced. "Signal the fleet," Admiral Kim ordered. "We go in fast and hard. Military vessels engage enemy warships. Civilian ships begin evacuation operations. And remember, people. We don't leave anyone behind." The human armada began moving toward the inner system, ready to show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened innocent people within range of Deathworld warriors. The quiet hum of machinery filled the communications room aboard the human monitoring station New Busan. Lee Dae-ho sat at his console, his fingers moving across the controls as he scanned the deep space frequencies. It was another routine night, shift in the year 2387, watching the empty darkness between stars for any sign of trouble. Lee Dae-ho had been doing this job for 3 years now. Most nights were boring. The galaxy was a big place and most of it was silent. But tonight felt different somehow. The young communications officer couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong out there in the dark. At exactly 0347 hours, his console started beeping. A weak signal was coming through the static, so faint that the computer almost missed it. Lee Dae-ho leaned forward, adjusting the receivers to get a clearer picture. The signal was breaking up badly, full of interference and gaps. "What do we have here?" he whispered to himself, running the transmission through the universal translator. The words came through in fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror. "Colony ships. Under attack. Children trapped. Please. Anyone. Help us." Lee Dae-ho's blood ran cold. He cranked up the power on the receivers, trying to pull more signal out of the darkness. The transmission was definitely a distress call, and it was coming from far away. Very far away. Captain Park to the communications room immediately. He called over the ship's intercom. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly as he worked to clean up the signal. Captain Park Boram arrived within 2 minutes, still putting on her uniform jacket. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair tied back in a neat bun. Like many humans in the Deep Space Service, she had spent most of her adult life watching over the frontier regions where trouble often started. "What do you have for me, Dae-ho?" she asked, moving to look over his shoulder at the console. "Distress signal, Captain. It's very weak, coming from the outer rim. The translation software is having trouble with it, but I can make out key words. Someone is under attack." Captain Park studied the readout on the screen. The signal was indeed faint, suggesting it had traveled a very long distance. The universal translator was working hard to make sense of the alien language, but enough was getting through to paint a terrible picture. "Can you clean it up anymore?" she asked. Lee Dae-ho worked his controls like a musician playing an instrument. He had trained for years to pull signals out of the cosmic background noise. Slowly, the transmission became clearer. Colony ships under heavy attack. Defense fleet destroyed. Civilians evacuating but trapped on surface. Children in the shelters. Please, anyone who receives this, we need help. The voice speaking was clearly not human. It had a musical quality, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Captain Park recognized it immediately. "Thylorian," she said quietly. That's a Thylorian voice. The Thylorians were one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They looked like tall, thin humanoids made of living crystal. Their bodies caught light and threw it back in beautiful patterns. They were gentle creatures who had never fought a war in their entire history. They grew food instead of hunting it, and they settled disputes by singing together until they found harmony. "Where is this coming from?" Captain Park asked. Lee Daho checked his navigation computer. "Kepler 442 system, Captain. That's in the deep frontier, about 47 light-years from here." Captain Park knew the system. The Thylorians had established their first deep space colonies there about 50 years ago. It was supposed to be a safe region, far from the trade routes where pirates might cause trouble. The colonies were small and peaceful, mostly agricultural, settlements where Thylorian families grew exotic crystals and raised their young. "Any idea who's attacking them?" she asked. Lee Daho worked to enhance the signal further. Sometimes distress calls included information about the attackers. After several minutes of careful adjustment, he managed to pull out a few more fragments. "Silicon-based ships, energy weapons. They're harvesting our colonies, taking our people as slaves. This is the Vortex Swarm." Captain Park felt ice in her stomach. The Vortex Swarm was bad news. They were a nomadic species that moved from system to system like locusts. They would strip a world of its resources and take any survivors as slaves to work in their mobile factories. The Vorthak were tough, aggressive, and completely without mercy. "How many colonies are in that system?" she asked. Lee Daho checked the Federation database. 7 major settlements, Captain. Population estimates put about 2 million Thylorians living there, including families with young children. 2 million innocent people under attack by the Vorthak swarm. Captain Park had heard stories about what the Vorthak did to captured civilians. The gentle Thylorians would have no defense against such brutal enemies. "Patch me through to Admiral Kim Tae-sung immediately," she ordered. Priority channel. Admiral Kim Tae-sung was the commanding officer of the Human Defense Force in this sector. He was an older man with gray hair and serious eyes, known throughout the fleet for his quick decisions and protective nature. When his face appeared on the screen, Captain Park could see he was in his ready room aboard the flagship Soul's Promise. "Captain Park, what's the situation?" he asked, without wasting time on pleasantries. "Admiral, we've intercepted a distress call from the Thylorian colonies in Kepler 442. They're under attack by the Vorthak swarm. Their defense fleet has been destroyed, and civilian populations are trapped on the surface." Admiral Kim's expression grew dark. He had dealt with the Vorthak before, and he knew what they were capable of. "How long ago was this transmission sent?" "Based on the signal delay, I estimate it was transmitted about 6 hours ago, sir." The Admiral was quiet for a moment, calculating distances and travel times in his head. "The nearest Federation response fleet is at least 3 weeks away from that system. By then..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what happened to worlds that fell to the Vorthak swarm. The survivors would be gone, transported, to slave markets in distant systems. The dead would be left behind on stripped, lifeless planets. "Sir," Captain Park said carefully, "we have several human ships within 50 light-years of that system. Not just military vessels, but civilian ships too. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, even some of the deep space mining operations." Admiral Kim understood what she was suggesting. It went against standard Federation protocol, which called for measured responses and careful coordination. But there wasn't time for protocols when innocent people were dying. "Captain, send a message on all human frequencies. Every available vessel within range is to proceed immediately to Kepler 442. Military ships are to engage the enemy. Civilian vessels are to assist with evacuation operations. Sir, the Federation Council will need to approve such a large deployment. The Federation Council can approve it after we save those people," Admiral Kim said firmly. "We don't leave anyone behind, Captain. That's not the human way." Within minutes, the emergency signal was transmitted across dozens of star systems. Human ships of every type began changing course toward the distant system where 2 million Thylorians waited for rescue. It was the largest humanitarian deployment in human history, launched not for profit or strategic advantage, but simply because someone was in trouble and asking for help. In the depths of space, the human armada began to gather, ready to show the galaxy what happened when Deathworlders heard a cry for help.